Step pyramids were the favorite architectural forms of these ancient builders. The same advanced civilization created them. However, these temples are in different parts of the planet. This Chichen Itza complex is located in Mexico, while the Pyramid of Giza is in Egypt. The Kop Kur Sanctuary was discovered in Cambodia. Textbooks will tell you that all these very similar step pyramids were built by different primitive societies independently of one another. But the weirdest thing is that these almost identical structures are separated by hundreds or even thousands of years and a distance of half the world. And if we assume that they were created by representatives of the same ancient advanced civilization who could easily cross the oceans, that's the development level close to the 20th century. Scientists have found even too many suspicious buildings, the appearance of which they can't fully explain or don't even try. In the US state of Ohio, there's a strange human-made hill called the Great Serpent Mound. Experts are still arguing about the age of the complex, stretching for 440 meters. The generally accepted version states that this snake-shaped mound was built by representatives of the Ford ancient culture around 1000 CE. Allegedly, there was just no one else who could do it. However, this version has yet to convince everyone. British journalist Graham Hancock doubted such conclusions and decided to conduct an alternative study. Not far from the Serpent Mound, he came across a complex of ancient burials related to the Adena culture, 1,500 years older than Ford ancient. But the most incredible thing is that the Serpent Mound rests on the ridge of an ancient meteorite impact crater. The tested samples showed that this collision occurred nowhere earlier than 125,000 years ago, leaving behind a powerful magnetic anomaly. Compass needles go wild in this area. Surveyors could accurately determine the cardinal points on the Serpent Mound only 100 years ago, while ancient people did it a couple of thousand years earlier without special equipment. They managed to do even more. The head of the serpent aligns with the summer solstice sunset, and the curves of the mouth serve as an astronomical calendar. According to the conventional version, all this was built by people who could only build huts and sharpen spears for hunting. But what if this primitive society occupied the more ancient complex built by someone else much earlier? Mainly because we found traces of an unknown ancient civilization with extraordinary construction skills in another corner of the world. Ancient maps testify in favor of the version of an advanced ancient civilization that was actively exploring the globe. On the map of 1513, we can see Antarctica, but how did it get there if our seafarers discovered the fifth continent only 300 years later? The ancient map has more mysteries. For example, the coastline of Antarctica, now hidden by the ice, is depicted with remarkable accuracy. Is this someone who knew what the continent looked like in the distant past? Modern science managed to study such details only in the 60s of the 20th century. But who could beat us by hundreds or even thousands of years? Could it be the builders of a giant pyramid on Antarctica's surface? This is a fragment of a satellite image of the Ellsworth Mountains taken in 2016. And there's more to come. The outlines of 16th century South America, still poorly studied back then, are also strikingly accurate. On the same map, mountains, rivers, and some lakes are marked on the continent. In ancient times, someone not only saw this piece of land from the sea but also managed to get deep into the continent. However, there are inconsistencies on the map of Piri Reis, even with our current knowledge of the world. On it, South America is connected to Antarctica by a small isthmus. But wait, could these continents have been connected tens of thousands of years ago in the days of an unknown ancient civilization? After all, in South America, we've also discovered many pyramids, and we still find new ones. Quite recently, researchers scoured the area surrounding a village in southern Bolivia using LiDAR scanners. Suddenly, under the jungle cover, they discovered a complex network of canals and the remains of several stone pyramids. Archaeologists discovered they belonged to the previously unknown Caral Soup civilization, 1,000 years older than the Aztecs or Incas. It seems as if someone specifically taught Native Americans complex architectural skills, and then they were adopted by later civilizations. However, geologists strongly dispute this theory about the pyramids in Antarctica. In their opinion, this is not the result of human activities, but of very specific erosions, just like the case of the famous alpine Matterhorn mountain. But the debunking of only one pyramid does not change the fact that many ancient human-made monuments are scattered around the world, and they are all suspiciously similar. Now, the ruins of the Gunung Padang Temple on one of the Indonesian islands no longer look so impressive, but in ancient times, it was a pyramid. Like the Great Serpent Mound, it also sits within an old crater. Scientists believe the complex should be at most 9,000 years. However, a recent radiocarbon analysis has shown that Gunung Padang's lower boundary date could push back the estimated date of construction by another 20,000 years. Scientists retort that back then, Earth experienced the most severe phase of the last glacial period, so people needed to be up to creating enormous memorial complexes. But do we still need to include something important while trying to fit Gunung Padang into our conventional history? The Ice Age is not as scary for an advanced civilization as for hunter-gatherers. These people could continue to travel the world, constructing their pyramids. After all, they were found in Egypt and all corners of the world. This is the Prasat Bakong Temple in Cambodia, and here's the Monte Ducati Sanctuary in northwest Sardinia, Italy. All these buildings have striking similarities. The boulders of the construction in Argolis, Greece, are joined so tightly that even human hair can't squeeze through the joints. And all this is done without any fastening solutions. Near Cusco in Peru, walls with similar masonry were found, even though these regions are separated by over 11,000 kilometers in the Atlantic Ocean. Moreover, looking at pyramid monuments in Egypt, Japan, and Easter Island, we'll see the same story. Even the sculptures of these complexes have something in common. Compare artifacts from Bolivia, Turkey, Indonesia, and Easter Island. These locations can only possibly be reached with a well-developed fleet. Is it entirely accidental that the ancient Aztecs had a legend about a god named Quetzalcoatl who allegedly came from across the sea in a boat that moved by itself without paddles? According to legends, it was Quetzalcoatl who taught people unprecedented skills, including the construction of pyramids. But here comes another strange coincidence. This image of superhumans passing on their knowledge is found not only in Aztec culture. The ancient inhabitants of Mexico fixed this event into stone by depicting a person granting gifts of divine knowledge. It looks like an ordinary modern bag. But similar scenes of knowledge transmission by ancient sages are found all over the planet. They're discovered in the most hidden parts of Göbekli Tepe, on the walls of the preserved Assyrian temples, and even in Sumerian arts and crafts. But if we assume that representatives of an ancient civilization could easily cross the ocean to bestow knowledge on primitive people, this would mean that their level of development was close to our 20th century. Could such a society disappear almost without a trace? In a recent article in Scientific Reports, American scientists announced the results of long-term excavations near Tel El Hammam in Jordan. A 1.5-meter soil layer of burnt organic matter, ash, and bone fragments suddenly turned out to be the site of an ancient space disaster around 1650 BC. This settlement was instantly destroyed by an explosion of a previously unknown meteorite. Scientists scrambled to find at least some mention of such a cataclysm, but they found only biblical legends about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, literally by fire from the sky. So myths are sometimes not fiction. And although such a disaster wouldn't have been enough to wipe out an entire civilization, there is an ancient legend about a global catastrophe, which may also prove to have some grounds: the myth of the Great Flood. The myth of the Great Flood can be found in the Bible, the tales of the indigenous peoples of America, and even the legends of Australian Aborigines. The ancient Finns even associated this event with the end of the world. Even an advanced ancient civilization would be in trouble if the flood were so global. Some data indicate that approximately 13 to 15,000 years ago, our Earth experienced a so-called cataclysmic period. It's like all the storms on our planet were raging simultaneously. But what could have caused it? Soil samples from that period contain numerous nanodiamond deposits. These are microscopic crystals that are formed as a result of the powerful impacts of comets or asteroids. But if the effects cause the flood, where's the vortex? Richard Firestone, an analytical chemist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California, found that most nanodiamonds are found in soil samples from North America. But back then, the entire territory of modern Canada was covered with a thick ice crust. And if the comet hit it, the instantaneous melting of a tremendous amount of ice could create a devastating wave and, as a result, cause a global flood. However, it's not a sure fact that it could destroy an entire civilization at once. The few survivors could theoretically settle in different parts of the planet to try to revive the former greatness and, at the same time, transfer fragments of their knowledge to other, more primitive civilizations. It's fantastic, but judging by the dating, the survivors of the secret apocalypse could be the ones who built Göbekli Tepe. In the meantime, the rest of humanity was hunting and gathering as they already had the necessary technology and knew how to cooperate reasonably. But if such a monumental building was erected by people exhausted by disaster, what were they capable of at the peak of their glory? And if they possessed high technology, why didn't we find it? Although we consider ourselves a relatively advanced civilization, which certainly left its bright mark on the planet's history, we can significantly overestimate ourselves. If our civilization disappears now, in 200 years, there won't be any traces of human cultivated plants left on the planet. In 10,000 years, cities will almost entirely disappear, except for the remaining large stones scattered around the globe. And we've just found something similar, the Bimini underwater road near the Bahamas called the Road to Atlantis. It consists of 700 meters of neatly laid out limestone blocks. The true origin of the structure is still being determined. There's no single plausible explanation among scientists. But where could this enormous road lead? Before the Great Flood, the ocean level was significantly lower in earlier times, and the ancient civilization surrounded almost the entire planet with such highways. That doesn't sound unbelievable, given that it would be easy to get to most other continents from Antarctica, which had yet to be covered with ice, as indicated on the ancient map. One day, we'll find the ruins of entire metropolises underwater. But if an unknown ancient civilization was so advanced, there is one problem. If we disappear, the glass and plastic from our buildings and machines decompose for about 15 million years. And after only tens of thousands of years, we would have found similar traces of the previous civilization. Or not. The source of all our plastic is crude oil. Ancient people could have failed to find it or considered it useless. It's also possible that they managed to predict the harmful effect of synthetic materials on the planet and just abandon their production. In other words, such a civilization could be completely organic and therefore leave no trace. But the development level is determined more by technology than by the structure of society. And if the ancient sages didn't use plastics as we do, they could find alternative ways to organize their civilization. Despite our prejudices, ancient societies might not necessarily be primitive. This conclusion was reached by the American anthropologist David Graeber, who studied various alternative structures of ancient human cultures. For example, in the early stages of the development of even our civilization, there could be tribes with a constant cyclical change of roles. Once every few months, enslaved people became chieftains, and vice versa. In doing so, they could change personal belongings and even names. After a while, everything was back to normal. Also, in his book The Dawn of Everything, he describes the primitive tribes, which consisted only of eccentric people who deliberately didn't observe any hierarchies, similar in principles of social organization, helped an unknown ancient civilization find alternative ways of development and develop much faster, even based on technologies that seem organic and invisible to us today. Simply put, the issue may not be that a highly developed ancient civilization is hidden, it's just that it's tough for us to see it with our prejudices. But one day, we may rise above them and find all the missing pieces of the mosaic of an ancient unknown civilization. However, ancient people might be similar to us in some things. The Indian epic Mahabharata describes an explosion as bright as 10,000 suns, after which a massive column of smoke and fire rose, and the birds fell dead to the ground. That sounds suspiciously like a nuclear explosion. I can't even imagine what it could look like. Do you think an advanced ancient civilization existed? Let us know in the comments.